to what Mr Corbyn's got to say.
For a moment and send our condolences to those that lost their lives in Leicester last night, and thank the emergency services, the police, the fire and ambulance and local residents for all the help and support that they gave to the victims of that tragedy last night. And could I also say a big thank you to Coventry University for allowing us this space this morning. Ultra high-tech all around us, the modern Labour Party, ultra high-tech. You're supposed to laugh at that point. Thank you very much. And also the work that Coventry University does in cutting-edge technology, research technology, and ensuring that the skills of decades in Coventry that built aircraft, that built cars, that built so much else are developed into the high-tech that we want for the 21st century of sustainable industries and sustainable technology. And can I also thank the shadow ministers that are here today. Rebecca Long-Bailey, who's doing such an incredible job on business and trade. Barry Gardner, who's doing a great job on trade itself. Becky and you work together, okay? And Keir Starmer, who's done such a brilliant job in holding the government to account and forcing them to retreat time after time on the whole issue of Brexit negotiations. Thank you very much for being here. And welcome the Coventry MPs for being here today. Thank you very much indeed. The City of Coventry, and I think we should also thank Geoffrey Robinson for the incredible work he did on Friday in the Organ Donors Bill in Parliament. It's made an incredible difference to the lives of many, many people. It's long been at Britain's industrial heartland is where we are now, and now set to be our next City of Culture. So well done, Coventry, on that. And I look forward to joining in the City of Culture celebrations. And indeed, I was given a book of photography within the Asian community this morning by the university, which I will treasure. Thank you. Next month, the government will embark on the second and most crucial phase of negotiations to leave the European Union, to set the terms of Britain's relationship with the EU for the long term. We're now 20 months on from the referendum that voted to leave, and a year on from the triggering of Article 50. But the country is still in the dark about what this divided Conservative government actually wants out of Brexit. They can't agree amongst themselves about what their priorities are or what the future they want for Britain after Brexit. They've got no shortage of sound bites and slogans, of course. The Foreign Secretary says it will be a liberal Brexit. The Prime Minister says it will be a red, white and blue Brexit. On other days, it's a bespoke economic partnership. The Brexit Secretary at least now promises it won't be a Mad Max-style dystopia, which you might think was setting the bar a little low. While the Trade Secretary can't contain himself at the prospect of pushing Britain into a spiral of deregulation in rights and standards. And the Cabinet seems to have agreed at Chequers to leave the door open to that, while their ambitious managed diversion goes on, whatever that means. But the truth is, we really don't know much more about where they're actually heading in these talks. While workers, businesses and everyone who voted in the referendum just want to know what the government's approach to Brexit is likely to mean for their future and the future of the country. As the opposition, we have been trying to hold this government to account. We have a duty to do that. Our message has been consistent since the vote to leave 20 months ago. We respect the result of the referendum. Our priority is to get the best deal for people's jobs, living standards and the economy, as Becky was explaining in her opening remarks. We reject any race to the bottom in workers' rights, environmental safeguards, consumer protections or food safety standards. And we've pushed the government to act, to guarantee the rights of European Union citizens living here and of UK citizens who've made their homes elsewhere in Europe. And I want to thank all those European Union nationals that have made their homes here, made such an incredible contribution to our communities, our lives and our public services, and say to the government, it's a shame on them. They've been through 20 months of uncertain horror because there's been no guarantee of their future. We will protect their rights by legislating immediately to guarantee permanent residence for EU nationals living here and the right to bring their families here. We also want to ensure there's a transition period on the existing terms. That was the very strong point that Keir and other colleagues put in Parliament, which would minimise disruption and avoid an economic cliff edge, to avoid any return to a hard border in Northern Ireland, and to guarantee Parliament a meaningful vote on the final deal. The Conservative government has dithered and delayed. Their divisions, their incompetence and their deregulation obsession risk putting jobs and living standards at risk as we leave the European Union. This is an economy that has already been damaged by 8 years of Conservative austerity, where wages are still lower today than they were a decade ago, where productivity lags dangerously behind other major economies, where the government has failed to invest and modernise, where more people are living in poverty, and where closing the deficit that was due to be eradicated in 2015, then 2016, then 2017, then 2020, and now been put back to 2025. After years of Tory bluster and slogans, the Conservatives have been found out. They have no economic plan and they have no Brexit plan. Every so often, they wheel out Boris Johnson to promise once more they'll cough up more money for the NHS after Brexit. And they've spent the last 8 years not giving money to the National Health Service that so desperately needs it. Even while they've been able to find billions of pounds, billions, to cut taxes for the richest corporations, to cut capital gains tax for the super rich elite, and to scrap the 50% rate for the richest too. And found billions more to cut inheritance tax on the wealthiest estates and to slash the bank levy. Yet the National Health Service has been subjected to the longest financial squeeze in its history. This is a government that failed our NHS pre-Brexit and during Brexit, and certainly can't be trusted with the NHS post-Brexit. Labour will give the NHS the resources it needs, because we will raise tax on the top 5% and big businesses, those with the broadest shoulders to pay, not by making up numbers and parading them on the side of a bus. We will fund, and we will use the funds returned from Brussels after Brexit to invest in our public services and the jobs of the future, not tax cuts for the richest. Today, I want to set out Labour's approach to Brexit in more detail, how we would do things differently, what our priorities are for the Brexit negotiation, and the values that underpin them. The first is our overriding mission, that whatever is negotiated must put people's jobs and living standards first. The Brexit process must not leave our people and country worse off. We're committed to building a more prosperous and more equal Britain, in which every region benefits and no community, absolutely no community, is left behind. As we set out in our manifesto, and that is what underpins our approach to Brexit. The second is unity. Most people in our country, regardless of whether they voted Leave or Remain, want better jobs, more investment, stronger rights, and greater equality. So we will not let those who want to sow divisions drive this process. No scapegoating of migrants, no setting one generation against another, and no playing off the nations of the UK. No one should be willing to sacrifice the Good Friday Agreement, the basis of 20 years of relative peace and development and respect for diversity in Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement was a huge achievement, and on this anniversary of it, let's respect that and the achievement that went behind it and not allow that to be undermined during the Brexit process. The third is our global perspective. We are leaving the European Union, but we're not leaving Europe. We're not throwing up protectionist barriers, closing the borders and barricading ourselves in. And we want a close and cooperative relationship with the whole of Europe after Brexit. We are a party of internationalists. We know that our interests are bound up with millions of others all across the globe. Whether that's in order to tackle the huge challenges of climate change, build a more peaceful world, or clamp down on the tax-dodging elite who think by bestriding the globe they can avoid paying their share for vital public services. I want to address each of these principles today because together they define Labour's approach to Brexit, the Labour Party's values and what the next Labour government will seek to deliver in office. So many of the areas that voted to leave are the same areas that have lost out from years of chronic underinvestment. Areas where too many people are held back by the lack of opportunities. Where people fail, the system is rigged against them. Because they can't get a decent, secure job, can't afford to buy a home, can't get more hours or higher pay, can't afford to retire, or aren't able to escape the spiral of debt. You can't replace secure jobs in manufacturing or mining with sport direct and insecure work like that. You've got to do better than that as a society and a country, and we're determined to do that. Labour's priority is to get the best Brexit deal for jobs and living standards, to underpin our plans to upgrade the economy and invest in every community and every region, to shift it away from the low-pay, low-skill, low-investment economy it's become under the Tories, and rebalance that investment across the whole of the country so that no longer will some regions get a mere 1/6 of the capital investment that goes to London. That's why Labour wants a Brexit for all our people, one that offers security to workers in the car industry worried about their future, hope to families struggling to pay the bills each month, and opportunity to young people wanting a decent job and a home of their own. These are the people we are thinking of and working for. It's a very different story around the away day mahogany table in Chequers. The government seems much more concerned about cutting deals with each other for their friends and their funders from the City of London. Labour is looking for a Brexit that puts the working people first. Leaving the EU, whatever that exit date comes, risks delivering a shock to the EU economy unless the right plans and protections are in place to allow the kind of investment and economic transformation programme that the country needs and that Labour is committed to. For 45 years, our economy has become increasingly linked to the European Union, and many of our laws and regulations set and monitored by joint European authorities. From implementing rules on the use of pesticides to assessing the levels of fluoride in our drinking water. The European Food Safety Authority plays a vital role in monitoring the substances used in manufacturing or growing our food, using the latest scientific evidence to assess whether substances are likely to have harmful effects on human or animal health. While the European Chemicals Agency carries out the vital task of evaluating and authorising chemicals as safe for use. And many businesses have supply chains and production processes interwoven throughout Europe. Take the UK car industry, which supports 169,000 manufacturing jobs, 52,000 of which are here in the West Midlands. If we look at the example of one of Britain's most iconic brands in this sector, let's look at the Mini. We begin to see how reliant our automotive industry is on a frictionless, interwoven supply chain. A Mini will cross the Channel 3 times in a 2,000-mile journey before the finished car rolls off the production line. Starting in Oxford, it will be shipped to France to be fitted for key components before being brought back to BMW's Hams Hall plant in Warwickshire, where it is drilled and milled into shape. Once that process is complete, the Mini will be sent to Munich to be fitted with its engine, before ending its journey back at the Mini plant in Oxford for final assembly. If that car is to be sold on the continent, then many of its components will have crossed the Channel 4 times. The sheer complexity of these issues demand that we are practical and serious about this next stage. I want to pay tribute to Keir, Rebecca, Barry and Emily Thornberry, who are grappling with these issues. They are serious and united in their work. Now, I don't do personal in politics, but let me simply say this: it's in a bit of a contrast to what's going on the other side of the House of Commons chamber. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to tread on difficult corns that people are suffering from. It makes no sense for the UK to abandon EU agencies and tariff-free trading rules that have served us well, supporting our industrial sectors, protecting workers and consumers, and safeguarding the environment. If that means negotiating to support individual EU agencies rather than paying more to duplicate those agencies here, then that should be an option, not something ruled out because of some phony jingoistic posturing by the Foreign Secretary. So we will want to remain a part of agencies like Euratom, regulating nuclear materials in energy and, crucially, in health sectors as well. And programmes like Erasmus, from which this university benefits greatly, with students from Britain studying across Europe and European students coming here to study. That enriches the lives of students on both sides of the Channel and all across the continent. It serves our interests, it serves the interests of young people all across Europe to maintain membership of Erasmus. We're leaving the European Union, but we're still working with European partners in the economic interests of this country. When 44% of our exports are to the EU countries and 50% of our imports come from the EU, then it's in both our interests for that trade to remain tariff-free. It would damage businesses that export to Europe and the jobs that depend on those exports for there to be the additional costs of tariffs. And it would damage consumers here, already failed by stagnant wages and rapidly rising housing costs. So, we will remain close to the EU, that's obvious. Every country, whether it's Turkey, Switzerland or Norway, that is geographically close to the EU without being an EU member state has some sort of close relationship with the EU. They're some more advantageous than others, and Britain will need a bespoke, negotiated relationship of its own. During the transition period, which was proposed by Labour in the first place, Labour would seek to remain in a customs union with the EU and within the single market. That means we would abide by the existing rules of both during transition. That is, so the government, businesses and workers only have to make one adjustment from the current situation to the final terms. Labour spelled out the need for a stable transition period last summer. Both the TUC and the CBI agree on that. We thought the government had accepted that case, but they now seem to be, very surprisingly, in disarray on this issue yet again. Time after time with this government, anything agreed at breakfast is being briefed against by lunch and abandoned by tea time. Disarray is, it seems, the new strong and stable. And the government's muddle and division risk the costly adjustments for both government and businesses, from the current terms to the transitional terms, and then again to the final terms. Labour would seek a final deal that gives full access to European markets and maintains the benefits of the single market and the customs union, as the Brexit Secretary David Davis promised in the House of Commons, with no new impediments to trade and no reduction in rights, standards and protections. We've long argued that a customs union is a viable option for the final deal. So Labour would seek to negotiate a new comprehensive UK-EU customs union, to ensure there are no tariffs with Europe, and to help avoid any need whatsoever for a hard border in Northern Ireland. But we're also clear that the option of a new UK customs union with the EU would need to ensure that the UK has a say in future trade deals. A new customs arrangement would depend on Britain being able to negotiate agreement for new trade deals in our national interest. Labour would not countenance a deal that left Britain as a passive recipient of rules decided elsewhere by others that would mean ending up as a mere rule taker. In contrast, the Conservative government has moved from saying it wanted trade with the EU after Brexit to be tariff-free to saying it wants it to be as tariff-free as possible, quite significant change. In which sectors of the economy and industry does the government think would be acceptable for there to be tariffs? They should let us know. Like with so much else, they haven't spelled that out 20 months after the referendum. But that is the consequence of ruling out the option of a customs union, which the government has done. So I appeal to MPs of all parties, be prepared to put the people's interests before the ideological fantasies, to join us in supporting the option of a new UK customs union with the EU that would give us a say in future trade deals. Labour respects the result of the referendum and Britain is leaving the EU, but we will not support any Tory deal that would do lasting damage to jobs, rights and living standards. Some seem very keen on downgrading our trading links with Europe. But we do not believe that deals with the US or China would be likely to compensate for a significant loss of trade with our neighbours in the European Union, and the government's own leaked assessments show exactly that. Both the United States and China have much weaker standards and regulation. Those deals would risk dragging Britain into a race to the bottom on vital protections and on rights at work. Environment, consumer and rights at work are pretty central to everything the Labour Party believes in. And, let me make this clear, we're implacably opposed to our National Health Service or any other public services being part of a trade deal with Trump's America or a revived transatlantic trade and investment partnership style deal with the EU, which would open the door to a flood of further privatisation of public services and our National Health Service. And we're not prepared to ask the British public to eat chlorinated chicken and lower the standards of British farming. We would ensure there will be no reduction in rights, standards or protections and instead seek to extend them. A deregulatory race to the bottom would damage people's jobs and living standards. And Labour would negotiate a new and strong relationship with the single market that includes full tariff-free access and a floor under existing rights, standards and protections. That new relationship would need to ensure we can deliver our ambitious economic programme, to take essential steps to intervene, upgrade and transform our economy, to build an economy for the 21st century that works for the many, not just the few. Labour has set out how we would create a national investment bank to drive investment in every community through a network of regional development banks, so that every area has an industrial strategy based on investment in a high-skill, high-wage, high-productivity economy. And through our $500 billion National Transformation Fund, we would invest in a decade-long programme of renewal, so that Britain has the infrastructure that matches, if not exceeds, that of other major economies. In our transport networks, our energy markets and our digital infrastructure, too often Britain lags well behind. So we'd also seek to negotiate protections, clarifications or exemptions where necessary in relation to privatisation and public service competition directives, state aid and procurement rules, and the Posted Workers Directive. We cannot be held back inside or outside the EU from taking the steps we need to support cutting-edge industries and local businesses and stop the tide of privatisation and outsourcing, or from preventing employers being able to import cheap agency labour to undercut existing pay and conditions and result in grotesque levels of exploitation of vulnerable workers and loss of jobs to others and huge profits to the employer in the middle of that. We would deal with that. It was alarming that after the Brexit vote, there was a clear rise in xenophobic and racist attacks on our streets. The referendum campaign was divisive, and some politicians on the Leave side whipped up fears and division in order to further their cause. That built on the shameful vans telling immigrants to go home, that the then Home Secretary instructed to trundle around the country, stirring up division. I remember just after the referendum result receiving a text from a young person in my constituency who'd been subjected to abuse in the street for the first time. First time in his life he'd been abused for what he is, and he was very afraid. Our immigration system will change, and freedom of movement will, as a statement of fact, end when we leave the EU. But we have also said that in the trade negotiations, our priorities are growth, jobs, and people's living standards. We make no apologies for putting those aims before bogus immigration targets. Labour will design our immigration policy around the needs of the economy based on fair rules and the reasonable management of migration. Every industry needs workers. There is a skill shortage in Britain, and our National Health Service is already suffering because large numbers of EU staff have gone home because they're frightened of the future in Britain. We want to turn that around. They're welcome to stay, welcome to work here, and we need their skills and we need their dedication to public service. And under Labour, we'll make sure that happens. We would not do what this government is doing and start from rigid red lines on immigration and then work out what that means for the economy afterwards. As Diane Abbott, our Shadow Home Secretary, set out last week, we do not begin with how do we reduce immigration and to hell with the consequences. These are Tory policies and Tory values. Part of the reason why net migration has been relatively high in recent years is because of the skills shortage in the UK labour market. At the general election, Labour set out plans to invest in a national education service with free college, university training places to tackle those shortages and not drive young people into debt just because they want to get a university education. But people also feel frustrated when they're denied opportunities to retrain or improve their skills, and employers instead import skilled labour from elsewhere. We will also restore free English as a second language courses so that people who come here, whether as migrants or refugees, can learn English and fully participate in their communities and workplaces. We also set out how we would tighten our labour market regulations and strengthen trade union rights to tackle the insecurity and exploitation of all workers. When migrant workers come to Britain, they must not be exploited or used to undercut or suppress better working conditions or higher pay. Those issues can only be tackled by stronger employment law to stop employers being able to import cheap agency labour to undercut existing pay and conditions. Collective agreements and sectoral bargaining must become the norm. Labour stands for the rate for the job, not a race to the bottom. But let's also be clear, it's not migrants that drive down wages, it's bad employers that cut pay and bad governments that allow workers to be divided and undermined. And they want unions to be weak and passive. We will strengthen our employment law, invest in the skills of workers in Britain so they can progress. And we will oppose all those who, instead of seeking to solve problems, seek to scapegoat instead. The devolution of the last Labour government completed the peace process in Northern Ireland, which we must cherish. The Good Friday Agreement was a great achievement, and I pay tribute to the work done by the Prime Minister, Tony Blair at the time, Mo Mowlam, and many others who worked so hard on all sides in Northern Ireland to secure that agreement. We must continue to support the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly and to ensure we maintain the situation of no hard border in Northern Ireland. The previous Labour government also brought powers closer to home in Scotland and Wales, establishing the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. And so Labour believes that powers over devolved policy areas currently exercised by the EU should go directly to the relevant body devolved after Brexit. So that power is closer to the people. That is the same principle that informs the regional development banks that the next Labour government will deliver. The constitution of the Labour Party includes a commitment to support the United Nations, a promise, and I quote, to secure peace, freedom, democracy, economic security and environmental protection for all. Some want to use Brexit to turn Britain on itself, seeing everyone as a feared competitor. Others want to use Brexit to put rocket boosters under our current economic system's insecurities and inequalities, turning Britain into a deregulated corporate tax haven with low wages, limited rights and cut-price public services in what would be a destructive race to the bottom. Labour stands for a completely different future, drawing on the best internationalist traditions of the labour movement and of this country. We want to see close cooperative relations with our European neighbours outside the EU, based on our values of internationalism, solidarity and equality, as well as mutual benefit and fair trade. We're proud that Britain was an original signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights in 1948, and in 1998 Labour's Human Rights Act enshrined that in law. So Labour will continue to work with other European allies, including through the Council of Europe, to ensure our country and others uphold our international obligation. We must work with other countries to advance the cause of human rights, to confront the four greatest and interconnected threats facing our common humanity. First, the growing concentration of unaccountable wealth and power in the hands of a tiny global corporate elite. We must challenge that, working with our European neighbours to stop those who would play one country off against another, or those who hide their wealth offshore in order to avoid paying their dues to fund the public services that they all use at some point in their lives. The second, climate change, which is creating instability and fueling conflict across the world and threatening all our futures. No matter how much we inform them, pollution stubbornly, very disrespectfully, refuses to respect national borders. We can only tackle climate change, pollution and environmental degradation by working together, and many of our closest allies in that struggle are in Europe. The Green Alliance estimates that trade in low-carbon goods and services contributed over 42 billion to the economy in 2015. The UK low-carbon and renewable energy sector was expected to increase fivefold by 2030, potentially bringing 2 million jobs and contributing more than 8% to UK's national output. But that needs us to maintain our standards and ensure barrier-free trade in low-carbon goods. Those include eco-design and energy labelling standards, greenhouse gas emission standards for vehicles, and internal energy market construction product standards, chemical regulation, and nuclear safety and safeguards. So the importance of getting our Brexit settlement right is vital in this area, both in terms of Britain's industrial role in reducing climate change and in terms of protecting jobs and industry. Thirdly, there are unprecedented numbers of people fleeing conflict, persecution, human rights abuses, social breakdown, and climate disaster. The global refugee crisis is huge, and there are 65 million refugees across the world. That's the equivalent of the entire population of Britain. That crisis is a challenge, much of which is on the borders of Europe. And that challenge can be met by coordinating with neighbours, both to crack down on people smugglers who put men, women and children at sea in unseaworthy vessels, as Operation Sophia tried to rescue those from the seas around Europe, as too many desperate people are drowning in pursuit of sanctuary. These are people who are simply seeking refuge from cruelty and suffering. They want to make a contribution, but for accident of birth, it could be any of us. Let's have the hand of humanity to refugees around the world, not blame them for the problems that they're fleeing from. And I pay tribute too to the role the Royal Navy's played in their contribution in the Mediterranean, in saving lives and plucking people from danger in the sea. And finally, I want to briefly address the use of unilateral military action and intervention rather than diplomacy and negotiation to resolve disputes and change governments. Let's learn the lessons of Iraq, Libya and Afghanistan and be clear that we will not take our country down the road of regime change wars again. The real answer is genuine international cooperation, which confronts the root causes of conflict, persecution and inequality. And we will continue to play a role in partnership with the EU in that effort. We live in a globalised world. The lives we lead are dependent on the work of others and our trade with those from around the world. Many of us have friends and family that are from or who live in many other parts of the world. In contrast to the Prime Minister who said, if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. We believe, in fact, that we can only fully achieve what we want to as citizens of Britain by also recognising we are citizens of the world. I have long opposed embedding of free market orthodoxy and the democratic deficit in the European Union. That's why I campaign to remain and reform in the referendum. Scepticism is healthy, especially when dealing with politicians, and there's plenty of them here today, or the received wisdom of the political and media establishment, and there's plenty of those here today as well. But often the term Eurosceptic in reality became synonymous with anti-European. And I'm not anti-European at all. I want to see close, progressive cooperation with the whole of Europe after Brexit. Labour is the party of the new common sense on the economy, on public services and on Brexit. The only party which recognises the world has changed these last 10 years. And no, we cannot continue with widening inequality, deregulation of industry and privatisation of public services. We're in a country where Tory-run councils are collapsing because of cuts, where homeless people are dying on the streets in the shadow of Parliament, where good jobs are being lost because we've got a government that will not get a grip on the casino economy. In or out of the European Union, we have to deal with that reality, the reality of market failure and of austerity. The free market has not worked in the banking sector. It's not worked in the water industry. It's not worked in the energy utilities, and it has crashed in outsourcing. It's failed our fragmented railways, and it has led to a labour market where abuse is rife. The European Union is not the root of all our problems, and leaving it will not solve all our problems. Likewise, the EU is not the source of all enlightenment, and leaving it does not inevitably spell doom. There'll be some who will tell you Brexit is a disaster for this country, and some will tell you that Brexit will create a land of milk and honey. The truth is more down to earth, and it's in our hands. Brexit is what we make of it, together. The priorities and choices we make in negotiations. The Conservative government is damaging our country, and their priorities for Brexit risk increasing and exacerbating that damage. But I also know what a Labour government could do for this country, and that our priorities for Brexit negotiations are the right ones. To create a country that works, really does work, for the many, not the few. Thank you very much.
So applause for Jeremy Corbyn's speech in Coventry. Rebecca Long-Bailey, the local MP, alongside him. And we're expecting a question and answer session coming up shortly now, which we will bring live to you as well.
We've got time for some questions now. I'll do them in groups, and we should have some roving mics around the room. I think we've got 2 on the go at the moment. So I'll start on this side. Gentleman with the red tie and the glasses. Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News. If you went into a customs agreement, the say you have may just be a right to be heard, not a right to a vote, not a right to a veto. Would you live with that? And can I just ask one other, because you pointed out...
Say that again.
Sorry. You might just have... is it the microphone, or is it...
Yes.
Is that bad? If you go into a customs agreement, you might just have a right to be heard, not a right to a vote or a veto on any trade agreements that the EU might have. Could you live with that? And just one other, if I may. You pointed out it's been 20 months since the referendum, and you say the Tories have been playing politics. Why have you suddenly now come round to the idea of a customs agreement? Some people might think you've got a political game on your mind.
Do another 2. I've got the lady sat down with the blue dress on, just a little bit further along.
Thank you. Anushka Astana from The Guardian. A QC, George Peretz, has pointed out this morning that a number of European countries spend more on state aid per head than the UK does, and also that Scandinavian-style economies are obviously possible within the single market because they exist. What specific Labour policies do you hope to implement that you believe requires an exemption from those single market rules?
We'll do one more from this side. The gentleman with the blue tie and the lovely blue jumper there.
Thank you very much. Nick Watt, BBC Newsnight. Mr Corbyn, it's often said that because we don't see you at these set-piece interventions on Brexit very often, that you're keen for Theresa May to own Brexit's success or failure. And yet in the last week, you raised it at Prime Minister's questions, and here we are today. And I'm just wondering, do you see an opportunity to shape Brexit or an opportunity to ship out Theresa May?
Well, I love your blue sweater. It's very nice. We have a team. I know it's a bit of a difficult concept for the Tory party to understand. We actually have a team. It's called the Shadow Cabinet. It's called our Brexit negotiating team, and we've travelled far and wide. I've travelled over many parts of Europe. I've maintained a very close relationship with colleagues from the Party of European Socialists and developed that understanding because we want an alliance with them in the future. Indeed, I think I've attended more meetings of the Party of European Socialists than any Labour leader in the past. And our team is obviously part of that. I did raise these matters with the Prime Minister at question time last week, as you know, and you'd heard all of that. And we will continue making these interventions. Listen, it was only 2 weeks or so after the referendum in 2016 that Andy Burnham, who was then our Shadow Home Secretary, before he went on to become the Mayor of Greater Manchester, proposed an amendment to Parliament, or a resolution to Parliament, which would guarantee EU citizens their rights of residence in Britain. We've been on this from the very, very beginning of trying to deal with the consequences of the decision the British people handed to us. On the points that Anushka raised from The Guardian, the issues are of competition rules and the issues are of the rules on state aid. And, for example, the nationalisation of RBS, in order to accommodate European rules, was accompanied by the selling off of some of the best parts of RBS, and the public was left with the remainder. Royal Mail is a natural monopoly. Mail delivery is a natural monopoly. I do not agree with or accept the idea there has to be competition in mail delivery. After all, we all have one letterbox, and it's much more efficient to have one postal delivery person coming down the street rather than 3 or 4 from different or competing companies. And likewise, the idea of sort of competition in water supply is a little odd when there's only one water pipe comes to each house. So the idea that the competition rules work for the benefit of all is, we do not believe to be the case, and we set out very clear in our manifesto, which did receive a huge degree of support, was public ownership of water and mail, and also of train operating companies. On the point raised by Channel 4, I've set it out in the speech what we want to achieve. What we're going to achieve is our right to be able to negotiate and consult at the same time with the European Union on the sort of trade agreements that we make, and also to influence them on the sort of trade deals that are made with the rest of the world. For example, EU trade agreements at the moment have a human rights clause in them, very seldom enforced. They also have what I hope would be much stronger clauses on workers' rights and opportunities in third world countries or non-European countries from which goods are imported. I would want to see those things stronger, and the Labour government would be committed to making those things stronger. Does that mean we have to be passive takers? No. We are a large economy, we are an important part of the world trade system, and we would obviously negotiate to achieve that. Barry has set this out very clearly in many debates in Parliament.
I have a second question. What took you so long? Some people might think you want to play politics now with this issue.
Well, that's a really strange question, because I, as you know, spend a lot of time travelling around the country doing campaigning meetings. The issues surrounding Brexit come up all the time, and we thought it would be helpful if, as the second stage of negotiation beginning, we set out our views here today, which is exactly what we're doing. And thank you for coming along.
Okay, any more questions? We've got a lady in a blue dress down there.
You mentioned, hi, I'm Polly from Free Radio News. You mentioned about the automotive industry in Coventry. Jaguar Land Rover said last week that they would suffer dire consequences from the impact of Brexit, and thousands having to pay for it with their jobs. First of all, what do you say to that? And second of all, would your plan then reassure them of those fears?
I'll do another 2. Got the gentleman behind with the fetching scarf on there.
Thank you. Ben Kentish, The Independent. Mr Corbyn, you talked again today about the need to maintain a soft border in Northern Ireland. You admitted that staying in the customs union will only help that aim. The EU said repeatedly that the only way to guarantee that there's not a hard border is to stay in the single market. If it comes down to it and that does prove to be the case, are you saying they're wrong on that, or would you countenance leaving on the table the option of staying in the single market?
We've got a gentleman just on the little bit further back with the beard, trendy beard there.
Hi there, Charlie Cooper from Politico. There was a new campaign group formed a few weeks ago called Our Future, Our Choice. It's a youth campaign group, and their main purpose is to persuade you, Mr Corbyn, to back a second referendum on membership of the EU. You believe in the power of grassroots campaigns to change minds. Is there any chance they could ever change your mind on this?
On the question of jobs here in Coventry, yes, Coventry is a manufacturing centre, is a research centre, and is part of the whole West Midlands industrial strength, and clearly that relies very, very heavily on trade with Europe, as this university relies on overseas students, not just from Europe but from all over. And I want to obviously protect those jobs and to ensure that the universities can carry on recruiting large numbers of overseas students. But likewise, I also want to make sure that UK students don't go into debt in order to get an education. So our proposals here are that we have that effective trading relationship with Europe, and I think what we've said here today ought to be good news for the people in Coventry and on the West Midlands. On the question of the border with Northern Ireland, we are very, very clear that the Good Friday Agreement was a huge, enormous step forward in which both traditions in Northern Ireland and across the island of Ireland were respected, and that historical movement came because of very brave people being prepared to talk and negotiate about it, and it came about. Nobody wants to lose that, and indeed every meeting I've been to in Brussels or anywhere else, the Northern Ireland border issue does come up. That means there has to be a customs union that guarantees there is no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and that's our priority. We've made that very, very clear time and time again. On the question of decision on the outcome, what we've pushed for is a number of red lines in the House of Commons, one of which is the points that Keir Starmer has made many, many times, that there should be a meaningful vote in Parliament on the final deal, as indeed there will be a decision made by the 27 member states in the European Union plus the European Parliament. And so there's an awful lot of discussion and negotiation to go on. We're not doing the negotiations, but we are setting out what we would do. And if we were in office, the priorities we would make. We are not proposing a second referendum. What we're proposing is the final meaningful vote in Parliament.
So let's mix it up a bit now. Have we got any non-journalists who want to ask Jeremy a question in the audience?
Anyone on the mobile phone is a journalist?
I'll pick a lady. We've got a lady with the blonde hair, second row.
I want to say, please, will you hurry up and be our Prime Minister?
Yay. Okay, we've got time for another 2 questions then. Gentleman with the blue shirt sat a couple of rows back there. Standing up now.
Following on from that, Andy Bell, 5 News. Mr. Corbyn, sorry, following on from that, with this new shift in policy, is it your hope, your intention, that Labour MPs will now be able to join with Conservative rebels, defeat the government in Parliament, and maybe precipitate an election?
One more before we go home. I'll go to this side. Gentleman there with the coat on and the glasses and the beard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In Coventry, we've got an issue, probably so up and down the country, the police shortage on the streets. Certainly my ward, which I represent, Binley and Willenhall, there has been a meetings with residents and so on. I think it's up and down the country. Police is starving of the resources. Is there any possibility Labour government can look into it and make sure there's adequate policing on the street and there's no vigilantes on the streets?
Thanks for that, the last question. I'll answer the other 2 as well. We are pledged to increase police numbers by 10,000, or put 10,000 more police officers there. I was with David Jameson on Saturday in Stourbridge, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I was talking to police officers and the community there. They're losing their PCSOs. Other parts of the country are also losing their PCSOs. So that sense of community cooperation between the police and local citizens is lost, and the police only then come in when there's a dire emergency or a major crime. That is not a good way forward. If we're to deal with issues of antisocial behaviour, of low-level abuse, of higher-level abuse, of knife crime and really serious issues like that, you don't achieve it by reducing police numbers. You can't solve it all on a computer in a desk somewhere. It's only achieved by PCSOs who understand the community and out on the streets. I spent part of last week, I was in Great Yarmouth, and I spent a while talking to 2 local police officers who'd both been on the same area for 10 years. They knew everybody in the community. They knew all the strains and stresses, and they were able to relate to that community, and the community related to them. So they could help. And the points they all made, everybody makes all the time, was if you cut police numbers, you close youth clubs, you dismiss youth workers, you reduce the availability of community centres, recreational facilities, of sports facilities and everything else, is it very surprising you end up with more and more antisocial behaviour and more levels of crime? We're saying it's a false economy to cut police numbers and PCSO numbers. What we would do is invest in the community infrastructure that's provided by youth workers and community centres and all those. That's why we're fighting the local elections, and that's why austerity is so wrong. Andy, thanks for your question. Look, we're putting our views to Parliament. We are not in a majority. We have the result we got in the general election, and we are determined to win the next general election whenever that comes. We're fighting to protect jobs, to protect living standards, consumer rights, environmental living standards, and above all, the rights that people have at work. And I've tried to set out what I believe to be a more global view of our place in the world than that which the Tories do. There is no future in turning this country into some sort of xenophobic offshore island that just sees everybody as a threat or a rival. No! We're an open, multicultural, multilingual society. Let's be proud of that, proud of what we've achieved, but above all, say to people in every community, in every part of the country, a Labour government will not let your industries disappear and be replaced by nothing other than short-term, insecure, zero-hours contract type work. We are serious, very serious, about investing in every community in the country. Surely the political class should learn a lesson from the results of the referendum, was that sense of anger at left-behind communities anywhere in Britain. We will not walk by on the other side and let towns and cities die for the lack of investment. It's our duty to achieve something very different and very better. And yes, we're campaigning very hard all over the country to win the local elections and then a general election when it comes, and so you'll get a Labour government that way. Is that okay?
Back to wherever it is you're headed now. And if you haven't been able to ask a question, then please don't hesitate to contact either myself, Kia, or Barry, or indeed Jeremy's office throughout the course of the day, and we'll do our best to deal with any queries that come in. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
So the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and Jeremy Corbyn bringing to an end that speech from the Labour leader on Brexit. Let me just give you a couple of pieces of reaction to that. This from George Osborne, who has tweeted, Tories gifted Corbyn an open goal on the customs union, and he just put the ball in. And this from David Bannerman, the Conservative MEP for the East of England. Corbyn is offering a dog's breakfast Brexit. A half-baked shambles hurts the poor through keeping EU tariffs, betrays Labour voters on immigration controls and abandons the world for the EU, despite 90% future growth coming from outside Europe. So two very different takes on the speech we've just heard from Jeremy Corbyn. But let's now get the take of our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who is in Coventry for us and has been listening to all of that, of course. Norman, has Jeremy Corbyn clarified the Labour position, do you think? And is he offering something that both those who want a soft Brexit, those who voted to remain, and the many who voted for Brexit from Labour, is he offering them something to get behind?
I think the truth is, no, there are some areas where we still don't really have the details, but what we do have is a clear dividing line now between Labour and the Conservatives on Brexit, because Mrs May has ruled out staying in any form of customs union. She's also ruled out staying in any form of single market. Jeremy Corbyn today signalling Labour would stay in a customs union. He talked about a comprehensive EU-UK customs union, and on the single market saying that he wants a strong relationship with the single market. So we do have a clear divide now between the parties, and if you want to characterise it, I would say Jeremy Corbyn has firmly planted Labour on the territory of soft Brexit. Where we do not have clarity is on some of the details. So, Mr Corbyn says he wants a customs union, but he also wants the right to be able to negotiate our own trade deals. Exactly what Conservatives say you can't do if you stay in a customs union. Similarly, on this strong relationship with the single market, we know that Labour would be prepared to pay some money to stay in some EU agencies like Euratom and Erasmus. No answer really on what would happen in terms of freedom of movement. Would Mr Corbyn be willing to go along with that in order to secure that strong relationship with the single market? Would he also be prepared to abide by European Court of Justice rulings to secure that strong relationship with the single market? And here's the paradox. The Tories frequently been accused of wanting their cake and eating it. Exactly the same charge can be made against Jeremy Corbyn, because he wants membership, or he wants some very close relationship with the single market. Not at all clear that he's willing to abide by the sort of rules and regulations which the EU would almost certainly demand. Similarly, he wants to be in a comprehensive customs union with the EU, but not at all he would forfeit the right to negotiate the UK's own trade relationship. So we have a divide between the two main parties, but both of them are still in cake-eating country.
And cherry-picking country, no doubt, as well. Norman, just on the second part of that question, what about Labour voters who voted for Brexit? What will they make of this speech, in your opinion?
I think that is a moot point, to be honest, because for many Brexit supporters, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, stop paying money to the EU, getting out from the oversight of the ECJ, and crucially ending freedom of movement, that's what Brexit was all about. Mr Corbyn, it seems to me, has left the door open to all those things if he is to secure this strong relationship with the single market. And already we've seen for some Brexit supporting MPs like Frank Field saying, look, this will look like Labour is betraying its own Brexit supporting voters. And the real sort of trick for Mr Corbyn is at one and the same time to say to his Remain supporting MPs and his Remain supporting party activists, look, don't worry, not that much is going to change. We're going to have a customs union and we're going to remain pretty close to the single market, while at the same time turning around to his Brexit supporting voters and saying, look, we are really leaving. And in that sense, we still don't have that definitive clarity, and I would suggest deliberately so, in order to keep both sides on board.
But when are we going to have that clarity? Because time is running short. And if we look at the timetable for this week, especially what Theresa May is doing in terms of that big Brexit speech at the end of the week and all the events in between now and then, by the end of the week, do you think we're going to see a clearer picture emerging from the Conservatives?
I think it will be a clearer picture, but we will not get the sort of detail which many people crave, in part because the language has to be broad enough when ministers talk about managed divergence, a deep and special partnership, regulatory equivalence. That sort of language is designed to keep the likes of Philip Hammond and Boris Johnson on the same page. Secondly, there won't be detail because that is for the negotiation. So I think we will get more. But for those who think Mrs May is going to set out a blueprint for Brexit with all the I's dotted and T's crossed, no, I don't think we'll get that.
OK, Norman, I know we'll have more from you soon, but for the moment, thank you very much, Norman Smith in Coventry. And in a moment, we'll have a summary of the business news this hour with Ben Thompson. But first, the headlines on BBC Newsroom Live. That is our top story. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has set out his party's approach to Brexit with a promise that a Labour government would support a customs union with the EU. 4 people have died after a large explosion at a shop in Leicester. Police say there could still be people buried in the rubble. And legislation to crack down on expensive energy tariffs is being introduced in Parliament. The government says around 11 million customers will see their bills cut. More on that in the business news next.
Hello, I'm Ben Thompson. These are the top business stories. As you've heard, there are new proposals to